Hello everyone, welcome to Exotico Miami. Today is a very special day with us. Here I have my mentor, my great friends, my fratello, what we call it. I'm very happy and honored to have you here, Jeff, for the second time. And we took this chance to invite bartenders and our tiki friends and brother and sister here for the day. Some of us tonight we're gonna have a very intimate dinner with Jeff. It's gonna be nice. And that's it. I talked too much. Jeff, it's all of you. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you. Do I need both of these? Yeah. Aloha, everybody. Sorry about the late entrance. I'm sure you all have some familiarity with the I-95, right? Need I say more? Anyway, thank you all for coming today. I really appreciate it. In one of my favorite places in the world to talk about my favorite thing in the world, which is tiki drinks. This is going to be a lot less formal than the usual thing I do, which is a seminar with an audience and slides and a structured talk. This is going to be more about you guys and girls. It's going to be about what you want to know. So anytime anybody has any questions or comments, I'm just going to be up here, rambling until somebody has something they want me to ask. Before I get started, so that everybody gets whatever questions they have answered, are there any questions up front about anything about tiki drinks or the tiki world or anything any of that stuff? Yes, sir.
What drove you to unearth the recipes?
What drove me to unearth these recipes was the question. A little background. I came of drinking age in Los Angeles in 1980, back when dinosaurs still ruled the earth and snakes walked. And at that time, that was the dark ages of the cocktail. I don't know, I don't see anybody here old enough to have lived through that. But the drinks had gone totally downhill. Cocktails were just at their lowest point. The reason being that cocktails just were uncool. Cocktails had just crashed and burned in the 1970s during the whole disco craze, when in order to alter your consciousness, you just basically snorted or smoked. You didn't sip. And cocktails went by the wayside, and the industrial food complex also took over, where everything was immediately pop it out of a can, like pina colada mix, Mai Tai mix, daiquiri mix. Nothing was being done fresh. And drinks were basically awful, except for one kind of bar. I stumbled into my first tiki bar, the Tiki Tea in East Hollywood, and had drinks, and these drinks were amazing. They were using fresh citrus. They were using all these secret weird bespoke bitters and flavorings that they did in the back room, and they didn't have a label on it, so nobody could rip them off. And they were mixing incredible culinary cocktails with all these different layers to them. And I couldn't parse the flavors. I couldn't figure out what made the drink so good. It's just that I liked the drinks. That was it. So these were the bars I went to. You can actually get a good drink. If you went to, for example, by contrast, a really expensive fish restaurant or steak restaurant with a really good chef, which there were plenty of in Los Angeles, and you got an amazing appetizer and a first-class, world-class main, whether it was like a steak or a fish fillet or something like that. But if you ordered a cocktail from the bar in that restaurant, it would be absolute crap. It'd be martini mix from a can. And that disconnect between the kitchen and the bar was the biggest problem, let alone bars by themselves. I mean, if you went to a bar in the 80s, you just went to get a shot and a beer. You didn't think about ordering a cocktail. The bartender would be pissed off at you. What, you mean I have to mix a couple things in a glass? I don't want to do that. Here, just have some wine. So the tiki drinks were the only cocktails that I thought were worth the shit, and I kept drinking them. But as I was drinking them in my favorite hangouts, like Trader Vic's, the Kowloon, the Bamboo Room, all these places started to close up. Kelbo's is another one. Because the fad was over. And it was a long fad. It was probably the longest cocktail fad in American history. Puts the Cosmo craze to shame. It started right the day after Prohibition, and it ended during the disco era. It was 40 years. It's an incredible lifespan for a cocktail fatty, and we'll get into exactly why in a bit. But to keep answering your question, all the places that I was drinking these drinks in were disappearing, and I finally figured out that if I wanted to make these drinks, if I wanted to drink these drinks, I'd have to learn how to make them. And there was no way to do that. Trader Vic did publish his recipes, so we knew how to make a Mai Tai and a Fog Cutter and a Scorpion. But other than that, all these fabulous drinks I was drinking, they were complete mysteries to me. And if I asked one of the old-time bartenders, like the guy Ray Bowen at the Tiki Tea, who was like 98, when I started working up the gumption to actually talk to him, because he was a rather forbidding presence, I would say, Ray, what's in this drink? This is a great drink. This zombie is amazing. He goes, rum and fruit juice. Oh, okay. Well, what about this drink? Rum and fruit juice. Okay. Hey, can you make me like an original Don Beachcomber's Nui Nui? He goes, no. Oh, why not? I have no mint. Oh, I'll walk across the street to Ralph's Market and get some mint. He goes, not going to work. So this is what I was up against. There was nothing in the written record. These recipes had never been published. They'd never been written down. And the reason for that was they were valuable trade secrets. It all started, of course, with Don the Beachcombers, day after Prohibition ended in Hollywood. He had come up with this brand new way of mixing rum. Why rum, by the way? Why are we all drinking rum drinks today? Because rum was cheap. During Prohibition, it was the only safe thing for Americans to drink because it was all being ferried in by rum runners, like the real McCoy and all these people from the Bahamas and from other islands into Florida and into New Orleans. And you were pretty sure that if you bought a bottle of rum on the black market in the US, what was on the label was what was in the bottle. And this was not the case with gin or whiskey. It was the case with Canadian whiskey because that was being smuggled down from the north. But if you wanted gin or whiskey, which is what most sophisticated, hip, cool people wanted to drink. They wanted to drink martinis or a slug of whiskey. That was basically the only two acceptable drinks for the upper class people at that point. You couldn't get it. You were going to get a bathtub gin, and you were going to get bootleg scotch. And these things could literally kill you, and they did. People went blind. People got what they call the Jake leg, where your leg just starts spasming, and then you can't walk, and then you just keel over and die. That was from this stuff called Jamaica ginger, which was like 190 proof ginger extract, which you could still buy legally because it was a medicinal thing. But people would use that as a flavoring for their bootleg whiskey, and God help you if that's what you got. So people finally started to drink rum, which sophisticated people did not drink before Prohibition. It was regarded as a low-class drink for sailors and for bums. Ernest Hemingway described alcoholics as rummies. It was low class. But it became something that people drank because they had no choice. Now, as soon as Prohibition ended, everybody wanted their whiskey and their gin back. And nobody wanted anything to do with rum. So the rum runners are overstocked. The distributors had all this stuff now, and they couldn't give it away. As Ray Bowen told me, you could get a really good 12, 15-year rum from Jamaica for like 70 cents a quart. Nobody wanted it, although one guy figured out how to make some money with it. Ernest Raymond Beaumont Gant, alias Don Beach, had been to Jamaica, he'd been to Cuba, he'd been to Martinique, and he understood the differences between different kinds of rum, which no bartender in America after 12 years of Prohibition did. If they did anything with rum, they just stuck to Bacardi and made daiquiris, because you had to be the equivalent of a rum sommelier to parse the vast flavor spectrum of Caribbean rum. Over the 300 years since rum was invented in Barbados, allegedly, each island had developed its own kind of fermentation, distillation, aging methods, blending methods. Some made rum out of molasses, some made it out of fresh sugarcane juice. And the end result was that if you took a white Puerto Rican rum and tested it against a dark Jamaican rum, they don't look the same, They don't taste the same. They do different things in cocktails. They have different densities. They're made a different way. They have almost nothing in common except for the fact that they're both cane spirits. They're both rums. In the same way that a Chablis and a Pinot Noir have nothing in common. The color's different, flavor's different, the density's different. They do different things when you eat them with the same foods, but they're still wine. This is what rum was. Like, you would never think of mixing 2 different bourbons in an old fashioned, or 3 different gins in a martini, but that's what Don Beach ended up doing with rum because of that vast difference in flavors. And he figured out all kinds of different patterns. This is not random. This was not just throwing 3 different rums in a glass and seeing what happens. This is very carefully considered, scientific method almost. He would come up with combinations. My favorite of his combinations is the one he ended up using for the Zombie and the Navy Grog and a lot of his different drinks, which was you take that white Puerto Rican rum, a little floral, a little dry, you mix it with a heavy bodied, high ester, just bursting with flavor, but sort of sweet, molassesy Jamaican rum, dark Jamaican rum. The 2 rums don't fight each other. They seem to help each other. The dry white Puerto Rican rum cuts some of that dense molassesiness of the dark Jamaican, which in turn informs the rather thin one-noteness of the white Puerto Rican, but still allows you the best of both in the glass. Didn't stop there. He might take an overproof Demerara rum from Guyana, which has a very specific smoky, charred wood, kind of like a ship spray, sea spray and pitch, very idiosyncratic flavor, and use that as a top note. Mix that with the other 2 rums to give it even more layers of flavor that are all complementary, that don't fight each other. And this was brilliant. Nobody in cocktail history had ever done this before. If you go to the first cocktail book, Jerry Thomas's Bon Vivant's Companion, written in 1862, the first book with cocktail recipes in it in the US, there are some cases where he will mix rum and cognac, but he never mixes more than 1 rum together. And the same is true of every single cocktail book written up until Don Beach starts serving what he called he didn't call them tiki drinks, he called them rum rhapsodies. He starts serving his rum rhapsodies in Hollywood. He did the same thing that he did with rums, mixing 3 different rums in the same glass. He did the same thing with the other elements of a traditional tropical punch. If you were at the Hukilau and you heard my Planter's Punch thing, this is old news, and I'm sorry to repeat myself. But the Planter's Punch recipe that evolved from 1657 up until, all the way up until today, is basically sweet, sour, strong, and weak. Different ratios from different islands and different time periods, but sweet, sour, strong, and weak. So Don took the strong, which would normally have been just a dark Jamaican rum, and he squared it and cubed it by like doubling and tripling the kinds of rum in there. He did the same thing with the sweet. It's like, why not? Why just sugar, which is normally what the sweet is? What if you infuse that sugar with cinnamon and make a cinnamon syrup? Okay, fine, that's more interesting. But what if you take that cinnamon syrup and then you mix it with another sweet? Mix it with a pomegranate grenadine. Do these 2 things fight each other? Do they make it weird? Or do they make something even more interesting and flavorful? Okay, it works, let's keep going. You know, again, why stop there? Why not add to that cinnamon and that pomegranate falernum, which is already a compound syrup with many flavors in it. Lime, cloves, ginger, almond. This is the sweet base for example, the Zombie, as that rum base was for the Zombie. Didn't stop there. The sour, which would normally be lime juice in the Caribbean. What if you mix more than 1 citrus together? What if you mix lime and grapefruit? Does that make a more interesting, tangy, flavorful, provocative sour element? Yeah, it does. And then finally, does that sweet element and that sour element and the strong element, do they all harmonize? And do they all create this very, very layered, complex culinary cocktail? Didn't stop there. Even the weak got the Beachcombers treatment. Now, back in the day before ice, weak would have just been water, maybe some tea in the Caribbean. Later, it just became ice. Don took the ice and he used what in 1934 was the most cutting-edge forward piece of culinary equipment available to kitchens, the electric blender. That was the equivalent of like liquid nitrogen or all the other molecular stuff that's being done today. So he measured very carefully the ingredients for sweet, sour, and strong, and he did the same thing with the wheat. He would take 2 ounces, 4 ounces, 2 or 3 jiggers, very carefully measured depending on the drink, whether it was supposed to be light, heavy, strong, whatever. And he would jigger that into the blender in the same way he did all the liquid ingredients. And then he would do what we now call flash blending. He would turn the blender on, turn it off. 3 seconds, 5 seconds max. And what this did, it was like the Marvel superhero version of a swizzle stick. You know, a swizzle stick, what they've been doing in the Caribbean for centuries. I'm sure there's one behind the bar. Yeah, here's one. This was how they made Planters punches in the Caribbean. You take the swizzle stick, you put it into the glass full of ice and the other ingredients, and you go up and down and side to side and side. What does this remind you of? This is an electric blender, only human hands doing it. The blender does this like a Marvel superhero. So 3 seconds, and you've got a drink that's perfectly diluted, and it's consistently diluted to the same strength every time because you measured the amount of ice, and you timed out the amount of blending. It also aerates the drink in a way that manual swizzling or shaking could never do, giving you a really nice mouthfeel. You've instantly chilled the drink without adding ice, which you did add, of course, but you've done all this stuff instantly, like in 3 seconds, and if there's pineapple or some other ingredient that froths, then you get a lovely froth on the top of the drink. So this was his rum rhapsody. This is what I was talking about in 1934 at the first tiki bar down the Beachcombers. This takes Hollywood by storm. You have Howard Hughes, all these captains of industry, studio heads, movie stars, Marlene Dietrich, Buster Keaton, the Marx Brothers, Orson Welles. They're all going to this little tiny bar that he has in Hollywood across from the Egyptian Theater. And they're experiencing these drinks and they're going nuts. And the newspapers find out about it. They start writing about it. The zombie goes viral because radio comedians and travel writers are making hay out of the fact that it's so strong. It's like a punch in the face to the Anti-Saloon League. And Don, being a marketing master, says you can only have 2. We will not serve you a 3rd drink. And this is like a direct provocation to the two-fisted, red-blooded American male of the 1930s who would normally not be caught dead with a fruity-looking red drink with a flower in it. But by saying you can only have 2, he's daring them to climb Macho Mountain. I can drink 2 of these standing on my head. You know, I'll show you. And at the equivalent of about $17 a pop in Hollywood, that was a very expensive way for these guys to prove themselves to their dates. And it sold fruity, feminine looking, there was much more gender bias back then, drinks to men who would normally not drink drinks like that. You still get men today who will go, you serve them a drink like this. This happens in our bar in 2023. You serve them a drink and I want this in a man's glass. Well, this is a man's glass. It's just like, you're a man, you're holding it as a man's glass. So he knew how to overcome all this. He did other manly sounding drinks, like the Navy Grog had a manly ting to it. The Cobra's Fang, we're going to serve you today our version of that. We're also doing another one with the name Deep Six. You know, it's like, yeah, Deep Six is coming out now. So who's making these drinks at the bar? The bar becomes enormously successful. In 3 years, they've moved across the street. Don and his wife, Sunny, they bought an apartment building, and they turned it into a huge restaurant, serving hundreds of covers a night, and like 700 drinks a night, all done with this flash blending technique, all made consistently, foolproof. Who's making the drinks? In the front bar, where Daniele is, you can see him here, if Buster Keaton comes in and he wants a martini, the front bartender, the white guy at the front of the bar, will say, yes, Mr. Keaton, and he'll make a martini. Now, hey. Marlene Dietrich came in and ordered her favorite drink, which was the, I think it was the Pearl Diver, it was something like that. If she ordered this tropical drink, this Rum Rhapsody, the bartender would go, yes, Miss Dietrich, and he would open up a little door to the back bar and say, you know, Pearl Diver, and close it. And in that back bar would be a bunch of Filipino guys who were doing all the real work making these drinks. And then the door would open, the drink would magically appear. Now, Don did this partly, it wasn't about erasure of Filipinos. It was who were very happy to work for him, by the way, paid well. And they were bartenders. I mean, they were learning their craft. And they had these secrets to these recipes. But eventually, guys like Ray Boone said, hey, all the really good tips are in the front. You know, what are we doing back here? And rival restaurateurs who wanted to cash in on the tiki craze started hiring them away. It's like, you have this secret knowledge. Mr. Boone, you know how to make these drinks. You're making $25 a week at Don the Beachcombers. I'll pay you $40 if you come to my bar and make these Rum Rhapsodies for me, and I can cash in on this incredible craze right now. And that's what Ray did. And Ray and a lot of other Filipino bartenders who started out at Don's became kind of like Johnny Tiki Seed. They go from place to place, doing the recipes. The drink started to spread, and all of a sudden it became a national craze with hundreds of places, all with their cocktail menus based on Don's menu. All his drinks, done to various different ways, depending on what produce you could get, where you were, what rums you could get, et cetera, et cetera. But basically it was Don's menu that was the template for this entire 40-year craze, until Trader Vic came along and invented the Mai Tai and Fog Cutter. So these guys, these bartenders with this secret knowledge, this was their passport to employment. If you had worked behind the scenes in the back bar at one of these places, and you got the knowledge, which by the way was not given freely. There was a bartender named Ray Barrientos who talked to me. He used to work at the Luau, a very famous place in Beverly Hills in its day. And he said he started as a barback, and for 6 months, his uncle, who had hired him, would not give him the recipes. He had to prove himself. He begged and pleaded, and finally he got the recipes. This was a very tightly controlled industrial secrets, all these things. But if you knew this, if you had the knowledge, if you had that little black address book where all these things were printed, this was leverage. You had, how many bartenders are there right now here? Okay, imagine you had secret recipes that every bar in the United States wanted, and you were the one who knew how to make it. A, you weren't going to tell anybody else unless you really had an incentive to. And B, this was your passport. You could work anywhere. You could go to a place that really wanted to be serving Don's Rum Rhapsodies, really wanted to serve a zombie, really wanted to serve a Pearl Diver. And this is what bartender Bob Esmino told me, who used to work for a place called the Kon-Tiki. He said, yeah, Jeff, what I would do is I would go to the general manager of the restaurant or the owner. I'd say, yeah, I'll serve these drinks for you. You can do a nice pretty menu with photographs or drawings. Name them what you want. I'll give you the ingredients you need to buy, but I'm not going to tell you the recipes. And if I get a better offer from somewhere else, or I don't like the way you're treating me, I'm going to leave and I'm going to take my recipes with me. And they did this. And a lot of tiki bartenders, as a consequence, built entire careers leveraging their way up because of these secret recipes. Now this is a very long answer to a very simple question of how did I start getting into learning these recipes. Flash forward to the 1990s, when I'm drinking these drinks and I'm talking to these old timers, and they're not telling me anything. Rum and fruit juice is all I'm hearing. And now we know why. It's just ingrained in them, right? Even some of them who had retired, who hadn't made a drink in 20 years, who I talked to, they weren't going to give it up. So I fell down a rabbit hole, basically. That's the short answer. I wanted to know how to make these drinks. I was curious. I had no motivation to become a bartender or to own a restaurant, ironically. At the time, it was my hobby. I liked these kind of drinks. I was curious. I wanted to find out how to make them. I wanted these recipes. And going to the library and looking up old magazines from the 30s and 40s, going to used bookstores, which at the time in the 90s, you could get books that are now 500 bucks on eBay, they were there for like $2, $3. Jerry Thomas's book, I got a 1928 edition for a couple bucks in a used bookstore. So I would be combing through all of these old recipe books, looking for these drinks. Couldn't find anything. Now, there's something else. The ones I did find were very often horrible when I made them, because they were just wild guesses by drink book writers. They weren't the real thing. So this is basically what started me down this path, and I eventually started getting recipes, but just by shoe leather, just by going to bars where I knew these people worked, and convincing them that, okay, when I did write a book, I was just trying to honor their contribution to mixology. I wasn't trying to rip them off and open a restaurant, which I eventually did 20 years later, but let's not get into that right now. So that's the background here, and I ended up writing 7 books, and met more and more people whose generally it was their fathers, their grandfathers who had passed away, and they just had these recipes in his effects. Sometimes it was someone who was still alive, like Bob Asmino. When I met him, he was in his 80s, and he eventually showed me the recipes from the luau, which is how we have those. But it was a long road, and again, I wasn't doing this full time. I had a job, it had nothing to do with cocktails. This was just fun for me. And eventually, long story short, it took over my life. And now here we are. Any other questions, any other thoughts, anything anybody wanted to? No. Okay, so what you're getting now is a drink called the Deep Six. And it's something that we created at Latitude 29 specifically for ceramicist Cass McClure did a really cool rum barrel stuck at the bottom of the sea with barnacles and a couple of octopus skeletons on it. We really liked it, and it just suggested somebody going to their watery grave years and years ago, and maybe this drink was in the barrel. It's a pretty much classically constructed Don Beach style drink where you have multiple strongs, multiple sweets. The sweets in this case are a mixture of falernum and a little bit of allspice dram, or pimento liqueur as it's also called. Pimento being a Jamaican pimento berry, which is an allspice berry, not the red stuff in cocktail olives. Not that there's anything wrong with that. So a couple of sweets. We're mixing together 2 different rums, the Hamilton Beachbum Berry Zombie Rum and the Hamilton Beachbum Berry Navy Grog Rum. So there's a whole bunch of different blends in there just out of those 2 bottles. And then there's a lime, pineapple. There's only 6 ingredients, that's why it's the deep 6. So I think that pretty much covers it. Lime, pineapple, yeah, so hope you enjoy it. Can I get one of those down here? Oh, yes, indeed, that's mine. All right. I'll take one of these straws too. So the rums in the drink that you're drinking, eventually, I went through that whole spiel just now about mixing 3 different rums in one drink. Specifically, it was done in the Zombie, it was done in the Navy Grog. The Navy Grog being my first truly favorite tropical drink. I had it at Trader Vic's in Beverly Hills in the 80s. At that time, it was either save up coins to do my laundry or go to Trader Vic's and drink a Navy Grog, so I had a lot of soiled clothing for a long time. Anyhow, Ed Hamilton, any of you know who Ed Hamilton is? He's a rum importer, does his own blends. He did one for the Florida Rum Society, and he'll do others. Oh yeah, okay, so you guys know. So this is kind of like the same deal. He came to me a few years ago and said, hey, do you want a Latitude 29 label on a bespoke barrel blend of rums? And I said, I don't know, man. It's just like, that seems just kind of like an ego trip. I don't think consumers are really going to care. And then I thought about myself as a consumer since the 1980s, hunting endlessly around the Los Angeles and San Bernardino counties, going to liquor stores and looking for what are now called dusties, old bottles of dead stock rum, so that I could make these drinks. Very often I would get a hold of a recipe and it would call for things that you just couldn't find anymore, like 151 Demerara rum. Where the hell was I going to find that? You know, it took me months to locate that. And in the end, it was in a liquor store. It was dead stock in the back. They didn't even know what they had. Another quick story. Most of the drinks called for a dark Jamaican punch rum. And I found what I thought was a really good one. It was called Appleton Punch. It was at a liquor store in Santa Monica. And I went in there, and there were like 5 or 6 bottles on the shelf. I bought a bottle of Appleton Punch rum. It was a dark, rich, 90 proof, just an awesome, amazing rum. But I was testing a bunch of recipes every weekend that I had found, and most of the bottle that I bought went down the drain, because I'd make 5 or 6 different drinks to see if any of them were good. No, this sucks, pour it down the drain. No, this sucks, pour it down the drain. Went back, got another bottle, burned through that one, same thing. Then finally I got the last bottle on the shelf, and I asked the guy behind the counter, "Are you going to reorder this?" He goes, "Reorder this? They haven't made this in 20 years." You know, so I just basically poured all of this priceless, gone rum down the drain. But that was what happened back then. There was no internet. You know, I couldn't just take a picture of the bottle and go on the internet and find out, you know, any of this stuff. Oh my God, yes.
Points for me.
Okay. I'll take the one with the straw. Come out, or I'll call him Maluna. Oh, well done, gentlemen. So, getting back to the blends in this drink. At that time, finding 151 Demerara rum, finding a good dark Jamaican rum, it was easy enough to find a Puerto Rican rum, that was everywhere. And Jamaican, yeah, Myers was fine, I used Myers. But there were rums that were really hard to source, and you would have to go to like 3 different liquor stores, and if you were lucky, you would get the 3 different rums you needed. So what I pitched to Ed was, what if we did what Trader Vic did in the 60s and 70s, and even as late as the 80s, you can still find it in supermarkets. He did a Mai Tai blend, so that you didn't have to hunt down Martinique rum, which was almost impossible to find in LA in the 90s. And he paired that with a dark Jamaican rum, and he put another couple little things in there just to tweak the flavor. It was a great rum. I would drink it on its own with an ice cube or 2, but it made a spectacular Mai Tai, and it stopped me from having to go to hell and gone finding the rums. And also, having a bunch of people over on a Friday night, getting ready to make them a brace of Mai Tais, and then saying, oh, I got 3 ounces of Martinique rum. We're screwed. So the Mai Tai rum was a really good idea, I thought. And he did a Navy Grog rum too, which was even better because that was 3 different rums. And that was delicious. So I had said to Ed, nobody did a zombie rum. I don't think the trader would be turning over in his grave if we did a zombie rum. He never did. That wasn't even his drink, you know. So the zombie was, as we discussed, is 151 proof Demerara rum, a good high ester dark Jamaican, and then a white, what they call Spanish style rum, which would have been usually Puerto Rican. The great thing about Ed's import company is that he has access to rums from Guyana, or Demerara rums. He imports rums from Jamaica, and he imports rums from actually Trinidad and the Dominican Republic, which are, the white rums are pretty comparable to a Puerto Rican, same kind of style. So we were going to craft a Navy Grog rum. And the 3 things that the rum had to do, the rum was supposed to take care of 3 things. Consistency, so you get the same zombie every time because you were just pouring a carefully measured amount out of the bottle, and you weren't having to substitute different rums when you ran out of the rums you wanted. So consistency. Cost. We made the rum at such a high ABV, 120 proof, that you only had to use half as much of the liquid in one drink that you would have if you were making one Don's Way. Don's Way added up to 4 ounces of rum. But by concentrating the flavor, by eliminating some of the water in the bottle, you get more rum flavor and you have to use less of it. So that bottle lasts longer, and so do you after a long night's drinking. So cost, consistency, and the third one, of course, was convenience. So we wanted to accomplish these 3 things with the bottle, but something else also. This is what I do every time I buy a new bottle of rum, whether it's supposed to be a rum for a cocktail, or whether it's supposed to be a rum for a daiquiri, old-fashioned, whatever. I still want to know what it tastes like by itself. And I will always pour just a little bit of it out and I'll taste it. So this rum at 120 proof not only had to make a zombie that tasted like a zombie, but it had to taste good by itself. I had the great good fortune to be hosted by Kern Mehdi of the Mai Kai yesterday, and he poured us out a little of their rum blend. They had to do their own bespoke Jamaican rum blend to get their drinks back to the way that they used to be when they got the rums they wanted. So you can relate, right? You know what this is all about. Yeah. So it had to taste good on its own too. In order to get all of this stuff done, I had to drink a lot of rum. And what Ed sent me, because we were going to do this at such a high proof, was bottles and bottles of rum that clocked in at like 170 proof, 160 proof, 130 proof. I was mixing all of this like high octane rocket fuel in my kitchen, and if you try 3 different blends of this stuff, you're on the floor. And that's it. That's the end of the session, and hopefully you took notes. So I went through this process for over several days. God knows what, I don't even want to know what my inner organs look like now. But I finally got a blend I liked. I thought, oh, cool, at last. And I sent it off to Ed, and I said, this is it. I think this is a good zombie. So he goes, okay, I'll have them, and it was like way overproof, and it had to be diluted down a little bit. So that's not a process where you can just add a splash of water. You have to do it like drop by drop in order. Are you guys familiar with that process? Can you explain it a little bit, maybe? I know you guys are rum experts.
I've got it.
Yeah, okay, so explain the difference between just diluting something by pouring water in it and the way you have to dilute a spirit so that it still works. And I'm going to drink my drink.
There you go. Yeah, the way we did it, we started out with higher proof, and we would start adding small amounts of water, and we would do maybe 130, not quite the high test you were talking about. We started at 135, I think, got it down to 130, 125, and just went on down to maybe 105. But what we found in tasting each increment, we found that some of the higher proofs actually had better flavor as we proofed down. It was really strange. So some of the rum distillers that we did the tasting with actually ended up bottling at a higher proof than they thought they were originally going to because of the flavor profile.
Right, this is exactly what we found, is like the higher the proof, the more rum flavor because the less water in the bottle. Anyway, long story short, I get the blend I like. Ed tries it in California. He says, okay, yeah, this is good. And then he sends the spec off to his bottling company up in the Northeast somewhere. And they're going to put it down to 120 proof and send back the samples. They did. I got the sample, I tasted it, and it was just fucking horrible. It was horrible. It just didn't taste anything like what I had done. And oh my God, I called up Ed again. Ed, what's wrong? This was my first attempt at blending rums, by the way. I didn't really know how any of this worked. So, oh, something must have went wrong when they diluted it down to proof. You'll have to start over again. I said, but Ed, if we do it this way, this could take 10 years. You know, I could be dead by the time this works out, because I failed chemistry in high school. I don't know about all this stuff. I only know that this is the flavor that was good. And he said, and this is why, if you do collaborate with someone, a lesson I learned far too late in life, collaborate with someone who knows more than you do. Otherwise, you're going to do all the heavy lifting and the work, and they're not going to be contributing anything, and then that gives collaboration a bad name. This is why I worked alone for so long. But Ed knows more about rum than I ever will, and Ed said, don't worry about it, I'll take care of it. And he did. I don't know what he did, I don't know how he did it, but the next sample I got back was just perfect. And I enjoyed that collaboration so much that we followed that up with a Navy Grog rum, same principle. This we knew had to be Navy strength. It had to be 114 proof. So this was a lot easier because we'd done it once before, and we got the flavor profile we wanted in a Navy Grog rum. Again, use half of it, half the amount. Don used 3 ounces of rum. You only need 1.5 ounces in the drink. Cost, consistency, all that good stuff. So, again, anybody, any questions, observations, anything they'd like to discuss or have discussed? Okay. Where could I go now?
Actually, I've got.
Okay, please.
Go ahead.
So I'm a big fan of the French rums, the agricultural.
Ah, yes.
And I feel like Americans just aren't developing a palate for it. I know we see it in some tiki drinks from time to time, but it remains very elusive, very hard to find. You never see it in bars except in one like this. So
Right.
what are your thoughts on, one, why hasn't it caught on here, and two, how can we change that?
That's a great question. The question about Martinique agricole rum and it's getting a toehold in the States. I think those rums are absolutely delicious. For me, the thing about Martinique, does everybody know what agricole rum is? It's rum that what you do is you harvest the sugar cane, you press the juice out of the cane, and within 24 hours of pressing that juice, you get it fermented and then distilled. Gives rum an entirely different character from molasses-based rum. It's going to have a grassy, herbal, almost tequila-like taste in a white rum, a sort of an agave, like very, very of the earth kind of a thing. And again, remember what we were talking about before, the vast flavor spectrum of rum. This doesn't taste like most people's conception of rum, but it's still rum. It's still a cane spirit. So it takes some getting used to. It took me some getting used to the first time I tried it, because the first time I tried it, I tried the white rum, which is great in a tea punch, but by itself, it's just like, well, this is kind of like an interesting tasting tequila, It's not what I'm used to. The aged Martinique rums, or rums from any of the French Caribbean islands, are just fabulous. I mean, it's world-class sipping stuff. And the more the rum spends in the wood, the more it starts to resemble other rums, and the less of that weird funk, that weird agricultural funk is retained. I find that bartenders like the white rums better, because bartenders always go for the rastiness, always go for the funk. And it's like, the more extreme, the better. But most consumers, I think if you're being introduced to agricole rum, it's better to have a Rum Jam VO, or a Clement VSOP, or Ed's Nissan Elevée sous Bois. Now, another reason why I don't think these have taken off is they're expensive. And one of the reasons they're expensive is because Martinique and Guadeloupe and the other French rum-producing islands are part of the EU. They're French colonies. And what's a nice thing to see when you go to Martinique and you tour the distilleries is that workers are working for EU salaries, the European salaries, and under European labor standards, which is lovely because, most of the time rum is kind of a guilty thing to drink if it's made in like Nicaragua or other places where workers just die in the cane fields. So, but that is one of the reasons why it's so expensive when it gets here. In Canada, it's a whole different thing with agricole. The Canadians have these very strict laws about parts per million of different things. They maintain that there is a substance in agricultural rum that at a certain volume could kill you. Now, it's the same substance that's in a loaf of wheat bread. And nobody's ever died from eating a slice of wheat bread. But for some reason, and the amount of this material, you'd have to drink like a case of Martinique rum to feel anything like what they're talking about before you get like toenail cancer or whatever it is supposed to give you. But they're very strict about that. And the guy who imports some of the best Martinique rums, senior moment right now, the Clement guy, Ben Jones. Ben Jones is he's tearing his hair out over there trying to get them to accept agricole rum. So agricole has a lot of...
Jeff, it sounds like the battery's dying.
Oh, yeah. So that's what I know about Martinique rum. There's speaking of Martinique rum and tiki, there are only a few tiki drinks that call for Martinique rum, but it gives a very specific, creamy, lovely, kind of nutty flavor to the drinks. One of them is a drink from the Mai Kai. I don't think it's on the menu anymore, but it was the Last Rites. The Last Rites was a typical tiki construction of multiple sweets and sours, and then it was made with 3 ounces of Martinique agricole rum. And it's your Last Rites, no question about that. But it's a delicious drink, and it doesn't taste like all the other drinks. One of the complaints that I sometimes have, and that most people have about a lot of tiki drink menus, The good places, the old school places, usually have at least 30 drinks on their menu to choose from. Tiki Tea at this point is up to 80. Mai Tai has what, like 40, something like that. So a complaint that a lot of people have about these menus is that after a while, everything starts to taste the same. So one way to avoid that is by using Martinique rum. And it will definitely distinguish the drink, from the other drinks. Another drink, of course, the most famous drink that uses Martinique rum is the Mai Tai. Now, there's some cocktail geeks and rum geeks have been flaming each other on Reddit and other places about Trader Vic, when he first started using Martinique rum, couldn't have been using agricole rum because it wasn't imported into the country. Okay, fine. But the fact remains that when I started drinking Mai Tais there in the early 1980s, he was using St. James Hors d'Oeuvres. He was using Martinique agricole because he could get it, and he knew that it made a better drink. So if you want to be a historical nerd and you're using what they call Grand Aromé Martinique rum, which is molasses-based Martinique rum, you go ahead, be my guest, but your drink's not going to taste as good. And Vic knew that. As soon as he could get his hands on agricole, he used agricole. So that's my hot take on that nonsense. Speaking of the Mai Tai, is everybody here familiar with the evolution of the rums that went into the Mai Tai over the years? See a lot of heads nodding, but anybody not familiar? Okay, we can just not deal with that then.
I think, Jeff, though, you make the point about the rums, and they changed over time. And that was the whole problem. That's what you discovered going and trying to rediscover and work on these cocktail recipes. They're not the same.
Thank you for that. That is a really good point. If you didn't hear it, what John was saying was one of the reasons that it's difficult and sometimes impossible to reconstruct a historical tiki drink as it was served back in the 20s and 30s, 40s, and 50s was that they were using very, very different rums back then from the rums they're using today. One of the main differences was proof. To get around higher taxes, rum companies importing to the US generally have a standard of 40 ABV now, or 80 proof. That's a lot of water in the bottle. And it's not at all what these same brands used to have back in the day. Like Cuban Bacardi, for example, before they switched to Puerto Rico. Standard proof for the unaged Bacardi Superior was 89 proof. Less water in the bottle, much better daiquiri. It doesn't taste just like spiked limeade the way it does with a 40 ABV rum. Another case in point, Jamaican punch rums. Myers is 80 proof. Appleton is 80 proof. It doesn't punch through, if you'll excuse the expression, in one of these tropical punches. One of the reasons why people complain that tiki drinks are sweet is because they're using the same recipe they used in the 1940s, but they're using weaker rums that don't cut through the sweet element of the drink. For example, standard proof for a Jamaican punch rum up until the 1960s was 97 proof. The Mai Tai used the stuff called Dagger rum from Ray and Nephew, 97 proof punch rum. Myers, until Fred Myers sold the company, the original Myers Planter's Punch was an awesome drink because the original Myers Planter's Punch rum, the one that you see in 7-Elevens now and everywhere else, it was an 8-year aged 97 proof rum. So you take a Planter's Punch that calls for, say, half an ounce of grenadine and maybe 3/4 of an ounce of sugar syrup. That is not a sweet drink when you're using a 97 proof rum within the same amount that what we would now put in as an 80 proof rum. So one way to get around that is to add more rum, but then you're also adding more water. Because again, the flavor should be concentrated. It's the same thing with simple syrup, sugar syrup. Daiquiri, the simplest rum drink of them all, was the one that I spent the most time working on before we opened Latitude 29. Because I knew that rum people would judge us on our daiquiri. Tiki people were going to judge us on our Mai Tai. That was another drink I spent a long time on. But the daiquiri was what rum people drank. And just regular bar. Oh, look at that presentation. This is what Daniele calls cinema, the Italian Cinema. It's just beautiful, beautiful. I love it. Awesome.
This is smiling cover.
I just need a very cinematic straw for this. If you give me a straw.
I'll give you another one.
Okay. Daiquiri. So, most people will make a daiquiri with simple syrup. What is simple syrup? 1 part sugar to 1 part water. Maybe 2 parts sugar to 1 part water. Water. Now, the most standard daiquiri recipe is 3/4 lime, 3/4 simple syrup, at 1-to-1 usually, and 2 ounces of white rum. First of all, that drink's going to be better with a white rum that's 89 proof instead of 80, or even higher. You know, it's going to taste more like a cocktail and less like spiked limeade. But more important, that sugar syrup is diluting the taste of the drink. It's water. It's just making the drink watery. What we ended up doing was taking sugar, plain old sugar, putting it in the bottom of the mixing tin, putting the lime juice, and stirring till the sugar was dissolved. That doesn't take any more time than it takes to make an old-fashioned, but it gives you a stronger, crisper daiquiri with a different mouthfeel, by the way. Sugar syrup also gives you a very syrupy mouthfeel, but you don't get that when you dissolve sugar. Now, of course, it's totally impractical to do that with every tiki drink that calls for sugar, but that one where it's only 3 flavors and you live and die on the balance of that, I would recommend using sugar. If there's simple syrup in that, it's not a problem because you've got a lot of other stuff going on and it's less crucial. This drink, by the way, I had a lovely, lovely, lovely drink at the Mai Kai reconstruction site yesterday, which was the Mai Kai's version of the Cobra's Fang, which they called the Cobra's Kiss because they're just nicer people than Don Beach was. We're friendly here. We don't want to bite you. We'll kiss you. It's a delicious drink. It's a wonderful riff on Don's recipe. This is our riff on it. We call it the Smiling Cobra, after the Mai Kai's nice version of the drink. And it's basically Don's Cobra's Fang with, again, that same combination of rums, of the Navy Grog rum and the Zombie rum. Now, there's 3 different rums, there's 5 different rums in the Zombie rum, because in order to get that 3 rum taste, we had to use a whole bunch of different proofs and everything. There's about 5 or 6 different rums in our Navy Grog rum as well. So what you're really drinking here is like a 10 rum blend in the drink. Some of them overlap, but it's still, it just proves that Don was a genius. He was a genius at mixing these things. And let it be said that he was not the only genius. There were people who followed in his footsteps and really, in a way, outperformed him. Mariano Liquidine, who was the head bartender at the Mai Kai from 1956 until all the way to 1980, was a genius in his own right, and he labored at Don's Chicago restaurant for 16 years. He started there in 1940, and then he got hired away by the Thornton brothers, who opened the Mai Kai in 1956 here in Fort Lauderdale. The Thornton brothers, to their credit, were unlike every other Polynesian restaurateur, or most restaurateurs of any kind for that matter, who gave credit where credit was due, and also gave control. They put their trust in the people they hired. Mariano chafed under his 16 years at Don's because you only had to do things Don's way. There was no room for creativity. But at night, on his off days, he would experiment, and he'd come up with his own drinks. And when the Thorntons hired him away, they gave him complete control and authority. He was there on the construction site with the blueprints before the structure went up, telling them exactly how to place everything in the bar, what the diameter of the holes were, where the bottles go through, from the ground up. And he did the same thing with his drink menu. The Thorntons were very closely involved with the drinks that he did, which they don't get their due in a lot of ways. I mean, there was a lot of back and forth. He would come up with something, they would test it, suggest refinements, they'd go back and forth again. Nothing was off the cuff that ended up on that menu. Everything had to go through a fairly rigorous process, if I'm correct about that, Kern. And some of the drinks he created are the only drinks in the tiki canon that don't just follow Don Beach's template or Trader Vic's template, which was slightly different. I'll give you a quick example. Trader Vic wasn't content to steal Don's bartenders when he opened up his restaurants. He was also a chef. He had his own refined palate, and he was a bartender. For him, it wasn't enough to commit industrial espionage. He wanted to learn how to make these drinks. So like Don before him, he went to Cuba, and he went to the bar Bar La Florida, or El Floridita, depending on whether you're regular or not. Regulars called it affectionately La Floridita. The most famous bartender in the New World at that time, not just Havana, but the New World, was Constantino Ribeiragua Vert, the owner, head bartender of the Floridita. Some of his regulars included Ernest Hemingway, Graham Greene. He was the man, and everybody who wanted to learn how to make a tropical drink in the 1930s went to Bar La Florida, and they sat at the bar and they just watched him work. He invented the frozen daiquiri, by the way. Don wasn't the only guy using a blender back then. So Trader Vic and his wife Esther go down there to learn, to get their education in sweet, sour, strong, and weak. And he asked Constantino, "I'd really like this daiquiri of yours. Can I take it back with me to the restaurant I'm opening up?" And Constantino was called El Rey de Coteleros, the cocktail king. So it didn't matter to him. He'd come on, no, I don't care. I got to take it. He was fine, you know. And Trader Vic went to, or Victor Bergeron. He wasn't Trader Vic yet. He also went to the Queen's Park Hotel in Trinidad and tried a Queen's Park Swizzle, which is basically a high-octane mojito with a heavier, darker Trinidad rums. And he went to Jamaica and had a Myrtle Bank punch. And he went back to his restaurant and he put a Queen's Park Swizzle on his menu. And he put Constantino's La Florida Daiquiri on the menu. And he actually name-checked Constantino. He actually said this was by him, you know. So a little bit cooler than some of these other guys who just kept the bartenders behind that secret passageway. But he wasn't content just to imitate, and eventually he started to find his own style. And he differentiated from Don in one crucial way, which was the strong element. Whereas Don would mix 2, 3 rums in the same drink, a revolutionary thing, nobody done it before. Vic took it one step further. For example, the Fog Cutter, which is another one of his masterpieces, has a strong base of rum, gin, and cognac. And then, just to show off, a float of sherry. But because he was a chef with his refined palate, he knew how to make these 3 very different volatile liquors work together to form a very new and exciting flavor base. So that was his contribution. Of course, the Mai Tai. But the Mai Tai, let it be said, is basically a rum margarita. The genius of the Mai Tai is that little bit of almond, you know, which separates it from so many other drinks and made it cross over from tiki drink menus into regular hotel bar menus and regular cocktail bar menus. It's the drink that made the leap. Because it's a simple construct, it's not hard to make. So, what was I talking about? Oh, the Cobra's Fang, yeah. Okay, here we go. Salud. Remember what I said about collaborating with people who know more than you do? It's so nice to do one of these things and not live in terror about how the drinks are going to taste when they come out. This is awesome. You guys are killing it. Thank you so much. A little round of applause for Danielle and his crew. Oh, Mariano. I was talking about Mariano. When he got to the Mai Tai, he used 42 different rums for 48 drinks on the menu, on the original menu. That's kind of astounding. That kind of precision and that kind of palate. And the Thorns gave him his space, and he created drinks that were separate from the Don style and separate from the Vic style, but still in the tiki zone, if you will. When the Mai Tai reopens in October, his most innovative, oh, what do we have here? Same, okay, great, thanks. Oh, I recognize this guy. He did something that nobody before him had done. He took a multi-rum, fruity, tropical drink construct, and he added coffee to it. And if you've never tried it, if you add chilled coffee, not hot coffee. If you add pineapple juice to coffee, it's right, yeah, and just put a little rum in that, and it's brilliant. But he had multiple. I think he had passion in the mutiny, or it's a secret. We don't even want to know. We're not going to pry. But fact remains that when you taste these Mai Kai drinks, they taste different from Don's drinks. They taste different from Vic's drinks. They had the stamp of Mariano, a second wave tiki bartender who came up schooled by people like Don and Vic, but then came into his own. So in October, make your way over there and drink the menu, and you'll be pleasantly surprised, I think. So, we could talk about, unless anybody has any other questions, comments? No? Okay. Shall we talk a little bit about the revival? The Tiki revival, of which we're all, at least I am, a very happy chap to see that happening. When I was researching and trying to reverse engineer and crack the codes of all these lost recipes, I thought I was the only person in the world who was interested in this nonsense, this arcane nonsense. There wasn't a market for it. When the craft cocktail renaissance began in the US, in New York, around 2000, 2002, by the way, stolen from London. Without London, we wouldn't have a craft cocktail renaissance. They started all that stuff in the mid-1990s. New York bartenders would go over to London, come back with all these new ideas, and then they'd start implementing them. That still happens, by the way. If you want to learn what's happening, what's new, techniques that you can steal, garnishes that you can steal, ingredients that you never thought of, go to London, go to a few bars, and you'll come back with a fistful of ideas. So anyway, long story short, the cocktail renaissance starts off in New York, bars like Death and Company, PDT, Julie Reiner's bars, Clover Club, Audrey Saunders, Pegu Club, the leading lights of the cocktail revolution. Coming out of those dark ages that I was telling you about, cocktail comes back, it's hip and cool again. People are paying big money for drinks instead of just for Coke and weed. And the one thing they don't want to touch, the one style of cocktail they do not want to revive is tiki. Because they craft cocktail bartenders regard tiki as part of the problem. Because they came of age in the dark ages when tiki drinks were, with a few exceptions, the tiki tea was still out there, the Mai Kai was out there, but nothing in New York, nothing in Boston, nothing in Chicago. There was, but you had to seek it out. San Francisco, same deal. Tiki drinks were all, at that point, devolved into slushy, cruise ship style, syrupy drinks that nobody who was serious about cocktails, especially the kind of pre-prohibition stuff that they were specializing in, like Martinez's, Old Fashions, Corpse Survivors, all that. Nobody would touch tiki, except for a growing number of retro culture lifestyle kids. Back then, believe it or not, I was one of those kids where the dominant zeitgeist, the culture in the late 90s was very corporatized. Everything was mass marketed. If something cool bubbled up from the underground, music, art, whatever, it was quickly co-opted and gobbled up by corporate big media and turned into something exploitable. MTV being a perfect example of all that. And where did the disaffected ex-punk rockers go when all this corporatization was happening? They went backwards. And this movement, it was all under the umbrella of, there was lounge. It was called lounge culture. So people went backwards and they started embracing swing music, hot rod music, surf music, elevator needle drops, easy listening, exotica music by Martin Denny and Arthur Lyman, the stuff they used to play in tiki bars, Frank Sinatra, Rat Pack kind of stuff. And under this big tent that included rockabilly, swing dancers, and hot rod people, tattoo people, were tiki people. People who were going to thrift stores and discovering shirts like this for like $2 and tiki mugs from this vanished suburban culture. Like, what are all these things? Furniture, music, paintings, mugs, all this stuff. And people started getting into it as kitsch, as camp, as retro culture. And eventually, tiki split off from that big tented lounge and became a subculture of a subculture. And we're talking about 2000, 2002. Sven Kirsten, if you haven't heard of him, he's a very important person to think about it. He wrote the first book about the vanished golden age of tiki from the 30s to the 70s called The Book of Tiki. He brought it all together and tried to make sense of it based on all these thrift store artifacts and bits of paper that we found at paper shows, postcards, menus, that sort of thing. And something weird happened as tiki started to bubble up and as people started to graft onto this thing because it was fun and it was escape. And here's another thing. I'm going to take another little tangent here because at the top of the hour, I said we were going to talk a little bit about why tiki was so popular and how it lasted as long as it did. Well, it's this, and I think this is a main reason why it's popular today. The worse things got historically, the better it was for tiki. When did tiki start? At the height of the Depression. Everybody was freaked out if they had a job about losing their job, if they didn't have a job about ever getting another job. The world, there didn't seem to be any way out of it. It just seemed like a really depressing time. You couldn't afford to go on vacation, but you could afford a mini vacation at Don the Beachcombers or one of the many places ripping him off. You could spend an hour or two in this like little island, movie set kind of island paradise. Most of these places had no windows. The whole idea was you're on a movie set. You're in a fantasy atmosphere. I don't have to explain it, just look around. So that takes you through the first phase of the fad. You'd think, okay, before the internet, it took longer for fads to burn out. But it had been like 8 years by the time 1940, 41 rolls around. You think, okay, what's the end of tiki? No, what happens? World War II happens. Another horrible, shitty thing happens. And it's great for tiki. Tiki bars explode during World War II because everybody, again, is super paranoid. We didn't know how it was going to turn out. We didn't know that we weren't all going to be speaking German or Japanese now. And also, you didn't know when you're going to get that draft notice and you're going to have to go over there and fight. And everybody was freaked out. Mothers, daughters, sons, everybody had a stake in this about your boy going off and getting killed and maybe losing. So that's great for tiki, and that little bit of fantasy just helped get through that period. And then you think, all right, war's over, there's a post-war economic boom because of the war, and maybe there's no need for tiki anymore. Well, no, because now we're in the atomic age. The atomic bomb went off, and oh, guess what? The Russians have it now. So now we're living under this cloud of doom. Like any day you can wake up and it would be a nuclear winter. The entire world would be destroyed by one bomb. Now, fortunately, we had tiki bars to get us through that. The Russians didn't, because they felt the same way about us, but they didn't have tiki, They just had vodka and, if they were lucky, caviar. Or if they were even luckier, they weren't sent to a gulag. Well, that's Russian drinking is a whole different seminar. So, again, that mini escape. And there's another dimension to the 50s. The 50s wasn't the sitcom 50s. It wasn't Happy Days. It wasn't I Love Lucy. It was a time of real conformity. The Eisenhower era, the man in the gray flannel suit. You went to work for a corporation. You had to adhere to strict dress standards. Everybody in your suburb was watching you to make sure you weren't doing something weird. Conformity ruled the day, and culturally too. Who were, aside from Elvis, what was there? Doris Day, It wasn't a very exciting time aside from rock, which was fought tooth and nail by big radio companies and by big media and all that. You needed a tiki bar, you needed a mini escape. And then there was that other element with tiki bars of paganism. You didn't wear a suit like everybody else on your workspace suits, and you didn't have to watch your P's and Q's and cover up your neck. You were going to a place that basically represented a freer lifestyle. So Tiki is good for that. Finally, by the 1960s, it's just been around for so long, and it was so successful that it just rode that wave through the 60s. And then you got bigger and bigger and more elaborate and expensive Polynesian palaces. Everybody was trying to outdo each other to capture that market share. Again, the Mai Kai is a perfect example of that. Just 7 dining rooms, a lagoon and a waterfall, and it's just a magical escape. There were places like the Kahiki in Columbus, Ohio that were like an entire block long with palm trees going up inside the dining room. Waterfalls everywhere. It was a good time to be into tiki if you had money, because these were not cheap places. This was white tablecloth fine dining. These weren't beach bars. These weren't Jimmy Buffett style kick off your shoes in the sandbars. These were places where you dressed up in your best outfits and you saved up for the last couple of weeks to make sure you could afford to check. And you went and you had a very elevated dining experience for the most part. Again, the Mai Kai, the chef at the Mai Kai, Kenny Lee, he won Esquire Fine Dining Awards, Holiday Magazine Fine Dining Awards. This was elevated dining. It just happened to be with palm trees and waterfalls and girls in bikinis serving you very often. So eventually, it just crashed and burned in the Vietnam era, and cocktails crashed and burned at the same time. Cocktails were what your parents did, and your parents probably voted for Nixon, and they were pro-Vietnam War, and you weren't. So you just started smoking instead. The revival of these drinks, to get back to that whole subcultural thing, happens when tiki starts coming into its own and it goes above ground. Otto von Stroheim out on the West Coast starts doing this thing called Tiki Oasis, which is like a tiki weekend event where all the geeks and the freaks could come together in their clothing and listen to the music and go to the shopping bazaar and get all the vintage clothing they wanted, and records and bands and drinks. And finally, the drinks, which we had been decoding and researching and bringing back, eventually the 2 parallel tracks of the tiki culture revival and the craft cocktail revival, they were on parallel tracks for a long time, but finally around 2009, 2010, they began to intersect. Because craft cocktail bartenders had burned through most of the pre-Prohibition classics. They knew how to make an old fashioned, they knew how to make a corpse reviver, they knew how to make a Clover Club. What do we do? Well, there's tequila. Oh, okay, let's start doing tequila drinks and mezcal drinks. All right, what else is there? There's rum. What do we do with rum? And they discovered the recipes that we were printing, and they saw that, okay, we've been making 3-ingredient pre-Prohibition cocktails forever. Here's a 9, 10, 12-ingredient cocktail. If I can master this is really stretching my muscles, and this is really helping me grow as a bartender and as a mixologist. And they started to get interested in it. And the first guy in New York was a bartender named Brian Miller, who was the head bartender at Death and Company around 2010, which was one of the premier craft cocktail places in New York. And he put a zombie on the menu. And then he put a Navy Grog, and he put the Nui Nui and other things in. And New Yorkers gradually started to, New Yorkers hate anything kitchen camp, and they're allergic to tiki. Well, neo craft cocktail tiki bars were springing up all over the country, not in New York. New York had to sneak into these other, speakeasy style bars. But anyway, eventually tiki comes into its own, and we have bars now that specialize in it, in the craft cocktail mold, and that's a happy ending. And thank you so much for listening to me blather on for so long. Let's do a little drinking now, huh? Cheers.
Thank you. We have battery. Thank you very much, guys, for coming. All right. Hope you enjoyed the section with Jeff. I was really looking forward. And any question? I think it's done. I can help him out. Anyway, the bar is open if you want to drink something. We'll put some music on. And who's going to stay for the dinner? You can stay here if you want, and just walk around, go to Wynwood, or we hang out till the night. Okay?
Oh, we do have a question.
Well, it's more, I would like to hear maybe from the two of you, now that the revival's happening. Personally, I like making drinks, and
I was gonna say, now that the revival has started, I never left tiki. I would say I was born in tiki 50s and still in it. But there's been a lot of talk about cocktails, and I love what Danielle does here. I mean, you're riffing and creating things and starting out with fresh ingredients and new things and trying new things. I really appreciate that. I try to go home and do some of the same things, and it doesn't work out so well. But I have my own that I have perfected and worked on. So I'd like to kind of hear from maybe you all about what you see going forward and what we as home mixologists, and maybe some of the bartender folks that are here, what we can be doing, what we should be looking for to riff old cocktails. I think a lot of times people are afraid to try to riff things. And I've found that just adjusting a few things for maybe my taste or my friends, I do some pretty good drinks. And so maybe you guys' perspective, because I know, Daniel, you're doing a lot of that.
A lot. So yeah. So first of all, thank to Jeff. I got a couple of recipes. Like the one is become a kind of our welcome drink. Become very popular. Actually, I had also my guy. It's called Bali High. And the recipe I got from Jeff maybe 10 years ago was modern day now, I would say undrinkable. The amount of citrus, actually the lemon, was insane. And then also you need to add a light rum and champagne, which is something you have a sip and then you start, having heartburns. So I think probably we don't know what in the 70s which kind of lemon they have in Hawaii, or probably was a different fruits that they didn't know when they wrote the recipe, and then when Jeff got it. So I love the idea of those ingredients. So a lot of these are very local here in Miami. So like the guava and the citrus, of course. So for me, it was like, okay, now we are in 2000, talking about maybe 5 years ago when we finalized the drink, 2000 something, and nobody would like this drink this way. So as you say, we fix it. So we make it in the way first of all, the way I do cocktails, I think always about woman. Because if a woman like it, everybody will like it. It doesn't have to be sweet, it has to be interesting. So that's for me, it's business. So first of all, I love, I'm very passionate about it. And as you can see, but I think also if a woman like it, everybody would like it. So we adapt. It's true. Like my Jungle Bird, I think you tried it as well. I think Jungle Bird is a great drink, but I think it's too flat. So I need a little bit of kick, because the Campari doesn't do enough. I also don't use Campari. I like better bitter martini. So in that case, I took it and then decided to call it to add ginger syrup instead of simple syrup, because simple syrup is just a sweetener and over diluted. Like same thing we say about the daiquiri. I super agree with you. I want to say something about daiquiri as well. And I call it the cock of the rock, which is a name of a real jungle bird. It's called cock of the rock, and actually the head is red. So that's the way we serve the cocktail, with the float and no inside the drink. So to represent the actual bird. So this one I think me personally, I like the name, and then I work around the name and the story. This also when we judge cocktail competition, we put this in because we usually judge things. But sometimes I was looking, why you have this name? Oh, because my aunt or son. It was no sense, no. So I like that they are, when you make a cocktail at home, get a right name, look something that you like it, work on it, and I'm not talking about even rum. Rum, this is something personal. So as we learn how to blend it, thanks to actually all friends like you, they teach us how to drink good rum. And pretty much that's it. And on a daiquiri, just one thing. Daiquiri for me, since I do this work, which is almost 33 years, daiquiri is a thing. It's like, as Italian, it's like making spaghetti pomodoro. Okay, to make like very simple thing. I love to play, not much with rum actually, but like play it with sugar. So you never been in Bologna, and you've been in Bologna, you know what? So we had a selection of sugar. So not a selection of rum, selection of sugar. So to make a certain drink, you need a certain cocktail. I mean, a certain sugar. I remember for the caipirinha, we use Brazilian sugar, Brazilian lime. We have Brazilian lime there, and we had the sugar changed a lot. If you use Malawi sugar or if Florida sugar, it's going to be completely different. Doesn't matter which rum you use. So this one of the things.
So are you using granulated sugar and then muddling it before you shake?
No,
You stir it with a lime.
So
Same-
what-
when you make an old fashioned,
Yep.
you're stirring the bitters and the sugar in a little bit of water so that it dilutes. It's the same principle, and it doesn't take any more time than that. And when bartenders complain that, well, I have to do this, well, yeah, but it's no different from making an old fashioned. And if I may add something, I'm sorry, Danielle, I'll let you get back to your thing, but you asked an excellent question about future flavor profiles and riffing. What you're talking about is something that is to be encouraged greatly on all fronts, because what did Don the Beachcomber do? He took a 200-year-old tradition of tropical drinking and he made it his own, and he advanced the art of mixology. What did Trader Vic do? He took what Don did and he made it his own and advanced that. What should we be doing now? Taking these foundational kind of templates and bringing them into the 21st century. And my take on this is there are two places to look to see where new flavors and new drink constructions are going to come from: Southeast Asia and the Amazon River Basin. If I was in Lima, Peru not long ago, and I went to a restaurant called Amazonas, which only had produce and juices and entrees made from things that you could find in the Amazon River Basin. And I saw things that to me were like extraterrestrial. It was like space fruit, and space vegetables and space spices. And there was nothing in this country that even approached these flavors. It was like going to another world, And if those things are ever exported into this country, it's just going to explode mixology. And Southeast Asia is already happening. You have people mixing galangal, a lot of Thai spices and roots, and macerating them in syrups. What are they doing in England now? They're doing very interesting things with a sandalwood, like the essence of sandalwood, and bringing that into a drink, which is amazing. So I think lemongrass, it's already here, it's being used. But there's pandan, another perfect example of something that's already made the jump. But that's where I would look to, and it's not. I'm not a traditionalist about these things. Yet, do I like the drinks that Don and Vic did? Yes. But am I excited about what the next generation, what y'all are going to do with it? Yeah, just as excited about that. So anyway, Daniele, back to you. And
Thank you. Yes. So, well, you just said right, and I've been in the same restaurant as you when we went to Peru for the Tiki Festival. And they brought me this dish with this fruit. I thought it was something made out of wood. No, it was amazing. So, but just a tip. Good. Thank you, guys. Ciao. Come to work. They're leaving. They need to come back to work. So, I suggest to anybody at the bar, they like to use sugar to make it faster. I just blend the sugar. I make sure the blender is super clean and not humid. You just any sugar you like it. Can be even not muscovado, of course, because it's wet, humid. But any granulated sugar dry, you can blend it and make like how you call it, powder sugar. So when you put it, and also have 1 spoon that is exactly the measure for 1 daiquiri or mojito, whatever. So you don't have to, I put much, put less. You have 1 sugar, always in the same place. You put it in with the sugar has already been blended. So when you add the lime, it's already gone. You don't even to mix it because it just dissolves right away. So when you make a lot of that, I learned that in my hard way. This making 100 daiquiris with you as well in New Orleans. So this first thing I do, just blend the sugar.
yeah, that's That's one really interesting way to goose up a very basic recipe. We do the same thing at Latitude 29. We use 2 teaspoons of sugar, but it's a sugar mix. It's 4 parts of like organic white sugar or evaporated cane juice. That's what, if you go into a grocery store, that's what it is. And then 1 part of a demerara or turbinado sugar to add a little hint of molassesiness and just give it a little depth. And that is something that really helps a very simple drink of rum, lime, and sugar. If you do to the sugar what Don did to everything, what Don did to the sweet and what Don did to the strong, it's just like, and you could do, you're more ambitious than me. I mean, you do 4 different kinds of sugar in some of yours, right?
Yeah, I mean, here, not much. We got some, but in Italy, actually, here it's not easy to find all this kind of sugar we have. And what we do, we play a lot with rum and glassware, as you can see, so to make look different. But basically, and we try to get the best for a drink and then make our own. Sometimes come out like the song. Sometimes the cover is better than the original. You know? All right, guys. Thank you.
Thank you all. I know
Richard is in the house.
Some people have books for me to sign. I'm happy to do it. Don't leave until I've signed your books. I know there's some over there. I'll head over there first, and then we'll get all that stuff. So.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.